Delighted to be here today with Rory Sutherland. Rory, sir, lovely to see you. How are you?
It's a pleasure. Delight to see you.
Great stuff. Listen, let's get straight into it. Tell me this. Behavioural science, where are we with it? I feel like it ebbs and flows with the wind. And sometimes we're in love with it and sometimes we don't. What's your take on the whole thing?
No, I mean, the vital thing is it's a lens, because it's an overly neglected lens through which to see the world. It has led, I think, in the past to a lot of blind spots, to a lot of things being done without proper regard for human psychology and behaviour, which have, in many cases, undeservedly failed because they haven't been presented or framed in the right way.
Okay.
And I'll give you an example, which is a contemporary and current problem. Okay, solar panels on your house. Okay, yes. Now it's generally assumed that what you have to do is write a cheque for £25,000, cover the whole of your house with solar panels, reach an agreement with your local electricity provider that they will credit you for any surplus fed into the house. Okay, now, what we know about human psychology, and by the way, you have to deal with no recognizable brand. There's no John Lewis or equivalent. It's some weird specialist provider you've never heard of. Humans hate large commitments with a small chance of disastrous failure. The roof collapses, you can't go on holiday for 2-3 months because there are guys crawling all over your house, and then your local electricity provider refuses to actually credit you for the electricity you feed in.
Yes.
The way to solve this problem is to sell it in a modular way. So you start off with a commitment of 1,000 or 2,000, which kind of charges your electric car very slowly when you're not driving anywhere for a couple of days.
Right.
And then you get then you might get 2 more, which will then feed into your, just reducing your basic sort of background load of consumption. Okay. And bit by bit, people might end up with a roof covered in solar panels. But if you ask people to do it all at once, basically it's a behavioural nightmare. So this is the point where very, very clever people have made solar panels very, very good. But what they haven't done is deploy any of that cleverness in asking the question, right, that's stage 1 solved. Stage 2 is, how do we actually sell these? Now, I'm delighted to say that when I last told this story, someone told me that a Dutch firm had actually adopted exactly the approach I was recommending and was selling solar panels on a kind of one at a time basis. I have those Philips Hue light changing bulbs above my head, yes. But trust me, I did not change the whole flat over in one go. I started with 3, yes. And I probably ended up with 25.
But so tell me this.
Go ahead.
When you tell that story, it's like I'm listening to you and I'm like, that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
And so why do we not take those sensible approaches when it's pointed out to you and you're like, yeah, that's obvious?
Because I think the methodologies, processes and constraints and blind spots that beset business and, for that matter, governmental decision making mean that you tend to end up with everybody seeing a problem through the same lens and from the same direction. And it's a little like Einstein's point that if he had an hour to solve a crucial problem, he'd spend 55 minutes defining the question and 5 minutes solving it. We spend too much time talking about, for example, I would argue that government, in terms of problem solving, is too dominated by economics.
Right.
And the dominance of one particular lens. I'm not suggesting the economic framework or model is utterly stupid, by the way. Yes. I'm merely suggesting that if it's the only one you ever use, you're going to end up with some pretty massive blind spots.
Right. Yes.
And it's the job, it's to some extent, I think, I occasionally ask the question, are these things actually a lot easier to solve than we think? The reason we think the problems are difficult is because we're trying to solve them head on, and the way to solve them is obliquely. There's a fantastic book by John Kay, who is an economist, ironically, called Obliquity.
Okay.
I really, really recommend the book, and it makes the point that in complex systems, I think what this all boils down to, is that, and I agree with Michael Hallsworth, very eminent behavioral scientist, formerly of the Behavioral Insights team, that ultimately what behavioral science will become is a very close relative to complexity theory.
Right.
And the things you have to understand with complexity theory, which generally don't get well understood by people who are using a kind of reductionist Newtonian mindset, are one, you've got to lose a sense of proportion. Because in human psychology, as in many other complex systems, small changes to the initial state or small changes to an intervention can have a massive effect on the overall direction of travel.
Mm.
Okay, now I think most people tend to look at problems thinking that a large-scale change requires a large-scale intervention.
Yes.
Actually, there's probably a correlation between size of intervention and size of effect in a complex system, but it's by no means exact as it would be in a more conventional physical system. So one thing is dare to be trivial, which is one of our great sort of mantras in the behavioral science practice at Ogilvy, because it might be that a really trivial thing makes an insanely large difference to the way people behave. And this literally goes down to the level of individual sentences or phrases.
Yeah.
Okay, so dare to be trivial and don't necessarily tackle the problem head on.
Right.
You know, you may actually want to tackle the problem by tackling something that appears at first to be almost removed from the topic you're trying to address.
Okay.
And so an interesting case there in interdependent systems would be that quite often in government, people like tackling problems head on because it shows that you're tackling the problem.
Yes.
Even if the solution isn't very effective, okay,
Yeah.
it shows that you're committed. So if you have a high crime area, people are much happier effectively putting more police on the beat, which is a direct solution to the problem, than they are, for example, changing the environment or the lighting on the environment, which actually reduces the incidence of crime.
Yeah.
Okay. Because A, it's expensive and it shows commitment. Now, I would argue if you want to solve the problem, not merely signal that you care about the problem, quite often the solution you'll arrive at will be very different. And the other thing is that also applies, I think, to businesses where a system of hierarchy often means that the people with power to change things don't get involved nearly enough in the weeds.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is sometimes where the changes need to be made.
I completely agree with that. And on the weird side, the people who understand what needs to be changed aren't the people who have the power to change it. So,
there's a wonderful edict, which I think is if Tesco ever had a brainstorming, they demand that 2 store managers were present at the brainstorming. And the reason was these people knew what was doable, but they also knew what happened when the wheels touched the tarmac. And a famous thing that arose out of this brainstorming was the fact that the price and the barcode for triangular packs of sandwiches, the sandwiches were redesigned so the barcode and the price were on the same side.
Right.
Now, the reason for that was that previously, whenever they marked down the sandwiches at the end of the day, you had to put a bloody great sticker over the barcode, turn the sandwich round and put a bloody great sticker over the price.
Fascinating.
And now you can just go along the shelf going bang, 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 and mark down the whole thing. That, that's the kind of thing which, okay, I'm not suggesting that Tesco's fortunes are dependent on such things. What I'm saying is that you'll never solve those problems if you address it from a top-down perspective. Yeah.
Rory, let me ask you one question about you before you go.
Of course.
Obviously, you've spoken all around the world. You've spoken to very esteemed people. Is there any organisation or audience you'd like to speak to where you feel kind of could be massively influenced by you in a positive way, I should say?
Obviously, transport's a particular fetish of mine, but actually, one of the things I would love to do is do a creative session in places like the Treasury or the Exchequer. I think in Jeremy Hunt we have a little bit of an opportunity here as well, because whatever you think of the guy, and he certainly has his detractors, I don't think he's fundamentally an unimaginative man.
Right.
And I think there are ideas for reframing and rethinking taxation that could be absolutely critical. One comes from my friend Roger L. Martin, a Canadian business guru, who believes that the tax-free component of your salary, shouldn't be annual, it should be a lifetime value. So instead of saying that you and I at our advanced ages get the first X thousand of our salary tax-free every year, instead he argues that at the age of 20, the first £150,000, say, you earn in your lifetime should be free of income tax.
Which allows you to get a leg up.
Which allows you to get a leg up, yeah. I mean, being blunt about it, I need less shit than I do now, simply because I've accumulated quite a lot of shit.
Yeah.
I earn more and I have, more wealth and more savings. So the point of actually forward weighting that tax relief seems highly intelligent to me.
I love that thought. That's really fascinating. Rory, listen, I won't keep you. Thanks so much indeed for your time today.
It's a joy. It's a pleasure anytime. Always delighted.
You take care.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.